In our last video, we'd configured the Azure Access control so that from our public side it would log out and allow us to authenticate, and then we would get an error. So let's go and finish the return configuration for our public site so that we can handle the Windows login that comes back. So I'm going to close out my web browser sessions. I'm going to go across to my Azure Access Control where I'm configuring. So earlier we configured the relaying party for our unsolicited sign-in, and what we need to do is go and configure what's called a rule group. A rule group will allow a set of parameters that determines values that get returned, and so we haven't configured those because basically when the user logs on, these values are going to be sent back to the public site, so we need to configure those values to be returned, and then we need to, on the public site, capture those values and handle them. So I'm going to hit a generate button here, and I'm going to generate it for our identity provider, which is Windows Live. So we're going to say generate, and we get one output claim, which is the value that we want to capture and handle in our public site. And this output claim is what's called the name identifier. So it's configured now to send that back to our public site. So we've done the setup there. Now we need to now tell the AX public site how to actually handle that, and so that's a little bit of manual configuration that we need to do. So I'm going to go across to IIS, and I'm going to go to my SharePoint site, and I'm going to go and hit Explore, and what we'll find there is our web config file for this site. Now you can copy and paste it and give it a date, for example, to say that was when you're copying it from, or however you want to archive them before you make a change. But in this case, I'm now going to open it up, and we'll be in Notepad to edit it. Now there's a few different settings that we need to go and configure, so I'll put these on the blog so that you can see it a little bit easier, but I've got them copied out into a file here, which is what I'm going to copy from. So the first one is that we need to configure or add a section to the to this SharePoint configuration group section, which is the top of the file. So you'll end up having a Microsoft Identity Provider setting in there. So I'm going to go over to my config file. We'll find the end here of this section, and I'm just going to paste in that. So the application authentication and the identity provider is what I'm adding there. So that's the first one. There's actually 3 changes that we need to make to this web config. So I'll go back to my sample file that I'm copying from. The next one is that there's a section here that hooks up the identity model, and so I'm going to copy that, and that one goes just before a section which is configured for Microsoft Dynamics. So if we go to our web config, we can see our Microsoft Dynamics. So I'm just going to go and add this section into the file there. Then we have a third section that we need to add, which is quite a large section. So third section is this identity handling section. So we've got Microsoft Identity Model is what we need to paste into there. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it into my config right at the end of the file. So I'm going to go to the location and just insert it before the end of the file. So there's a couple of settings within this section that we need to change. So the first one is going to be our audience URIs, to say that this is the site that we're working on. So I'm just going to change the setting that I've got there. and we need to go and configure this trusted issuer. So when that token is returned from Azure, this is the config for the public file, so we need to say that yes, we're going to go and trust Azure. And so to do that, we need to trust that certificate that we've configured there. So we need to put in the key to that certificate, which is the thumbprint, and I'm going to go and find that from our Azure site. So if we go to certificates and we find the one that we uploaded, we'll see the key for this one, the thumbprint, actually there on Azure. So I'm going to go and copy this one, and I'm going to paste it into our config file that we're editing. And so 5F8 is what it ends in, and so we'll see 5F8 is that thumbprint. So essentially we're saying if this is the site, they're going to send us our certificate with that token on the way back. If these match up, then we're okay, we trust that site and the data that's coming back there. So those are the config files, and again I'll put them on the blog, so it's a little easier for you to copy and paste and modify yours. But now we've basically told the public site that they can handle that token coming back. So we're going to say okay there. Now that certificate that we created, we want to actually trust. So I'm going to go and install the certificate to the local machine here. So that PFX file that we created earlier, I'm going to go and say install in the local machine. So we're going to say next. It's going to ask me for the password, so I'm going to say next, and I'm going to place it into a specific store, and the specific store would be the Trusted People store. So I'm going to install it in there and say next, and then we're going to say finished. So I've told the config on the website about the configuration. I've installed the certificate to the machine, so we should be right to handle the value back. Now, because I've made some changes to the web config file, I'm going to go and run an IIS reset. So I'm just going to say IIS reset. I'm just going to set the web server on the machine. So I'll pause the video while this is happening. Alright, we can test the website. In this case, there's still more configuration to do, but let's have a look at the error that will come up. So we'll go to the website, we'll go to our vendor portal, and then we'll go to sign up. And so we're going to get redirected, and then we'll get a different error message. Now, this message doesn't say too much, so let's have a look at turning on debugging so that you can see the message in a little bit more detail. So I've got a parameter setting here, so we want to find in our web config file a compilation batch, because we can set the debug to true for that, which will enable us to get a more detailed error message. So let's go and explore the website. We'll look at our web config file, and then we're going to go and find compilation batch. And so I'm going to go and change this to true. If we type true, okay, so that will turn on a more descriptive error message, and then you can see what we need to do for the next step. So let's go and try to access the website again. Okay, so let's try that again. In this case, we're going to get hopefully a more detailed error message. So we'll hit sign up, and then we'll say OK. Okay, so now debugging's on, we'll get a more detailed message. And so what we can see here is that if we read it, it says that the key identifier cannot be resolved to a security token. And so what this is basically meaning is that we need something to handle that token. Now we've told our public site with some of that web config that we're going to use the identity token handling. We haven't told SharePoint the details about how to handle that token a little bit further. So this requires some additional configuration. So let's close out of our website, and we've got our SharePoint administrator console that we used earlier to create the website. So we're going to use the SharePoint management shell, and what we're going to do is go and set up the Azure claims details into SharePoint. And so basically the claims that come back when we went and set up the rule group, we said that we had a claim coming back, and let's go and have a look at that. So one of the claims was name identifier, and so we need to establish those claims in SharePoint. So we can do that from a script here. So if we have a look, you'll see that we can establish that claim handling. So this is my name identifier, and we can set up some other names if they get returned, identity provider and then the name, for example. So I'm going to go and copy these into my SharePoint management shell, and we're going to say paste, and they'll get executed. So essentially those are parameters that are set up. Now we need to do some more. So earlier we created a certificate, and so we need to tell SharePoint about that certificate. And so in this case we exported that certificate in one of the earlier videos. So this is the security certificate, the CER certificate, and that's in our temp directory. So I want to go and tell SharePoint about that. So I'm going to copy this into my SharePoint management shell, and we'll paste that in there, and we'll execute that. Okay, so that's that parameter done. Now what we need to do is create a new token, a trusted token issuer handler, and that's done from a command inside the SharePoint management shell as well. So let's have a look through the parameter. So a new trusted token issuer, and we give it a name, Azure ACS, and we establish a realm. So I'm going to change the realm, and again this is an input parameter. This realm hasn't actually been created yet, and so we're going to go and do that on Azure. So let's go and have a look at doing that. Now the realm has a funny parameter sequence here. Now the importance is that what you create on Azure ACS matches what you use here in SharePoint. So that's the important piece here. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to go up to Azure, and I'm going to go and create a new relaying party. And so we'll add, in this particular case, I'm just going to say the name of my machine, portal. Now you can call it anything you want, but this just needs to be matched. And so then the realm I'm going to copy in there to be the realm that we're specifying in that parameter. So these have to match in that particular case. So that's what I've done in that case. Now what we can do then is the return. We can specify the portal, and we need to put a parameter there which is underscore trust, and this is how the trust handling is going to be executed. So I'm going to put in my machine name and underscore trust, and again we can specify XAML token 1.1 I could, if I want my token to last a little longer, just to give users some more time to be able to log on, I could do that. Now I can specify a certificate here. And I can use a dedicated certificate, and that's the one that I created earlier. So we'll save that. Okay, so we've got two certificates here, but they happen to actually just be the same certificate, so you can use the same certificate there. Obviously you'll need to match them. It's quite important that they need to be consistent there. And so we need to go and specify the rule groups. So we want to go and specify the default rule group for that portal that we just created. We want to hit generate. Windows Live is the identity, so we want to say generate, and this is going to generate the name identifier for that. Okay, so that means that we've configured that realm, and that's going to match what we've asked for here. So if we scroll across and have a look at the rest of the parameters, we want to specify the sign-in. So the sign-in is going to be the federation ID of that Azure Access Control namespace. So ours is called AXR3MAVM6, and if you named yours something different, you just need to match it to this part that you can see up in the Azure Management Console. Okay, and then we're associating the claims. So claims mapping claim 1, 2, and 3 that we did earlier is our input claim. Now the certificate, you'll see the import trusted certificate, the AXCert parameter that we used earlier. So the AXCert parameter is what we imported earlier. So that means that our parameters are configured. I'm going to copy this line that we've updated, and then we're going to execute that on the SharePoint Management Console. If that runs okay, then that means it's configured. Okay, so now we just need to do an association between the certificate. So I'm going to copy my certificate line in there. I'm going to paste that. Okay. And the last one here to associate the token signing certificate. I'm going to paste there. Okay, so what we've done is associated the certificates together, and we've configured SharePoint for the Azure Trusted Authority, and it's given a name, Azure ACS. So this is important that we've given it a name here, A in SharePoint configuration and then A in AX a little bit later. Now we can run a command, the get SP Trusted Root Authority command. We can run it in SharePoint. So if you want to come back later and check the details, you can run the SP Get Trusted Root Authority, and that will give you the parameters. So this is important, for example, because you want to check things like the certificate usage. You want to see the name where that's configured, because those are the things that's going to affect the token handling. Alright, so if all that's configured, if you go to IIS and do an IIS reset and let that run. Okay, so after that's run, let's go and access our public site. Okay, so if we've done our configuration, if I tried to hit the sign up now, then we should be able to sign out, and we should see the URL change briefly. So it flipped across, and then at least we're not getting the error that we had before. So the token's being handling. It didn't prompt me for the login because I've got browsers open. So I'm going to go and close all my browsers, and I'm going to have to log back into Azure for other configuration, but that's probably fine for the moment. So I'm just going to clean up my browser cache so we can get it to force a login. So I've got IE to delete all my browsing history, so hopefully that's cleaned up. X6 MAVM6 sites public. So in theory our login is not cached. Actually I can see it there, so we probably need to sign out, but let's give it a try and see if it comes up. And it won't come up because I've got a typo, R3. Okay, it comes up, and hopefully now it'll actually prompt for the login. So let's see. No, it's still caching the login. So you'll see when it's going across, it still remember my login that I'd used earlier. So it's coming back, authenticating and logging in. But at least now we've got the portal configured to handle the token when it comes back from the site. So let's end this part of the video there. We'll go further in following parts to see additional setup and see what happens now from this point forward. The main points are we've configured the SharePoint identity handling, and we've matched that up to the Azure Access Control for the claims that are going to come back from the Azure Access